this podcast from the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. My name is Camilla Kingdon and I'm President of the College. And in this episode, I speak with the Right Honourable Dame Andrea Leadsom MP. Ensuring decision makers introduce the very best public policy for children and young people is an important part of our work at RCPCH. We engage regularly with ministers, senior civil servants, members of parliament, lords and advisors on a wide range of matters. On some occasions, like this one, that will mean engaging with individuals from specific political parties. However, we never endorse political parties or movements, and we work with representatives of all parties equally, and that remains the case with this podcast. We're incredibly grateful to Dame Andrea for sharing her views as someone who has a central role in government policy making on early years. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Camilla.
So, as for a bit of background, Andrea is the Conservative Member of Parliament for South Northamptonshire and has been an MP since 2010. And crucially for us today, in July 2020, she was appointed to be the government's early years health advisor and to lead a review into improving health outcomes for babies and young children. And this led to the publication of the really important report entitled The Best Start for Life, a Vision for the 1001 Critical Days. And that was published in March 2021. And Andrea now chairs the Start for Life unit, which is a team of civil servants tasked with implementing the report's various policies. And by way of background, previously Andrea served in several senior government roles, including Business Secretary, Leader of the House, and Environment Secretary. And in this episode, we'll be hearing from Andrea about the Best Start for Life and her experiences of championing infant and child health in Parliament, and for us, how paediatricians can use their voice to support policy change on child health. So, without further ado, we're dying to hear from you, Andrea, and I thought I'd love you to just start at the beginning and tell us about the Best Start for Life programme. You know, how was it set up? What were the aims, and how's it progressing?
Yes, well, it's been a journey. So, I first got involved with babies about 25 years ago. I suppose 27 if I count my own first child, but 25 years ago as chairing a charity, the Oxford Parent Infant Project, that was providing psychotherapeutic support for families who were struggling to form a secure bond. And that for me was the real first dawning realization that actually having a baby is extraordinarily life-changing and extraordinarily difficult. Now, I'd had 2 years previously my own experience of postnatal depression with my first child, but I'd sort of got through it, gone back to work, everything was fine. But once I started chairing this charity, it was very clear to me that there just is no reliable support out there. People they find they're pregnant and then it's like, right, now what? And so whilst everybody more or less, but not absolutely everybody, finds their way to a midwife, they don't necessarily then find their way to a health visitor or to any family support. We see potential for domestic violence, for couple breakdown, for great misery, depression, PTSD from a traumatic childbirth experience, poverty, all of the sorts of, fear that I'll lose my job or that my partner's going to leave me. And then, of course, once the baby's born, that's when the pressure really starts, the sort of the crying, why does my baby cry? So many parents think, well, does he hate me? And that really does, for many people, become the reality of having a baby. And so what we have to do, we absolutely have to do, is to support families to give their babies the best start for life. So for me, as I say, over 25 years, I've become more and more passionate about the fact that parents, far from this being sort of nanny state, get your political nose out of this, actually families are desperate for support. And I must say, I chatted in the research phase of this project in July 2020 to March 21 with a very senior paediatrician who was married to a consultant paediatrician. And he was laughing when I said that to him, because he said to me, do you know, you're absolutely right. When my wife and I found we were expecting a baby, we were like, oh my goodness, now what? So even if you're at the top of your field, you can tell other people what to do. But actually, when it comes to, right, what about parenting programs, crying, sleeping, weaning, breastfeeding, you know, emotional feelings, etc., where do we go?
Absolutely. So I guess that was in the background of your experience. And then how did that translate into this big piece of work?
So I became an MP in 2010, and I was always accused by colleagues with slight eye rolling of banging on about babies. And I'm very proud to say that literally everyone in Parliament knows that Andrea Leadsom bangs on about babies. And I think it is just proof of the fact that it's only when everyone is rolling their eyes that your message is actually getting through. And what I was really proud of was that each of David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been persuaded. So through my time as a backbencher, where I set up the first 1001 Days movement, and also PIP UK, that was helping families, so as a charity. But all through that period, talking to other colleagues, setting up all party groups, working cross-party with the likes of Tessa Jowell and Frank Field, Sharon Hodgson, working with Lib Dem MPs, Scott Natt MPs, you know, and lots of Conservative MPs. What was very clear is that once anybody gets to hear about early brain development, early attachment, the importance of support in that critical early period, and once they hear some of the statistics about the cost saving, you know, don't think about the kindness, think about the cost saving, then actually it's a very compelling case. So it all really started when I was Leader of the Commons, and Theresa May gave me permission to chair an interministerial group into early years. And some of the junior ministers on that report that I chaired were the likes of Rishi Sunak, local government minister, Nadhim Zahawi, Children's Minister, Liz Truss, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. So all sorts of people who've sort of since morphed into other jobs. But that was the beginning, and that was in 2018, and then in 2017, and then in 2019, when Boris Johnson took over, he said, you can carry on. And when I left his cabinet, he then appointed me officially the government's early years healthy development advisor. And so it's been an ongoing journey ever since then. But I have to say, all politicians are signed up, some with more enthusiasm than others. But there's definitely no doubt the message has got through.
And Andrea, so the report was published in March 2021. Can you talk us through what's happened since then and what the next few years looks like?
Yes, so that's now 2 and a bit years of frustration, as you can imagine, because once you publish a report like that, and very unusually, the team and I decided to go for government right round, because then, rather than it just being an independently chaired review that the government takes and comments on at some point in the future, we actually went to government right round because I had this official position. And so what that meant was that the day it was published, it was actually government policy. And within that vision, we had 6 key action areas, 3 of which would be what families, parents would see differently. And the other 3 were about how the system could work much better. And it was all predicated on the research phase, where what was very clear from parents is, number 1, I got pregnant, I didn't know what I needed, and even if I did know what I needed, I wouldn't know where to find it. So what parents wanted was clarity. So that's where the Start for Life offer came from. That's action area number 1. Every person expecting a baby, couple, single parent, should be given a Start for Life offer. These are the services that you can, whoever you are, access, whether you're the Princess of Wales, whether you're a 16-year-old migrant, whether you're a same-sex couple, old parents, young parents, you can access all of these. And then the second action area was in a welcoming space, which we've called family hubs. So if you like, a one-stop shop in the family hub where you would receive your Best Start for Life services, so that it's the place you can go whenever you need help. Then the third thing is all about information for families. So COVID, we learnt a lot. We know families desperately wanted a return to face-to-face contact, but they also found actually it's quite convenient to be able to go on Zoom and have a health visitor appointment if the baby's just pooed and I've just missed the number 12 bus, So rather than cancel the appointment, I can actually go online. Likewise, for a lot of dads, dads, really the feedback we had from them was that parenting, babyhood has been a dad-free zone. Men are sort of excluded. They're not invited to take part quite often in the scans and the chats and so on. And yet they are strongly encouraged to turn up in the birthing room and to experience this sometimes quite terrifying occurrence of seeing their partner in potentially some considerable discomfort and fear. And then they're supposed to carry on as if nothing happened. And if they're lucky, they get 2 weeks off work to cope with sleepless nights, and then it's just like, I'm now a dad, and I'm fine, really. And for many dads, it's all about their partner. So actually, for dads, they quite often they do really, really want to know, how can I be a good dad? And when I say dad, could mean another, could be a same-sex couple, could be 2 dads, 2 mums, but very often the other partner wants to know how to be a good other parent. And also, what about my mental health? I found this quite scary, and I was quite nervous about what to do and how I might feel. And I'm not sure my partner is really thinking about me because all she does is think about the baby. So all of those things. And very often men want that virtually. They don't want to be in a physical place. So physical, virtual, lots of advice and help, both online and through the family hub. So those are the areas that families will see differently through this rollout of this project. And then the 3 that make the system work better, one is about outcomes measures, because the Treasury is quite brutal. They will require you to provide evidence of what works, how it's made a difference, how it's in the taxpayer's interest. Quite right that they do that. The next thing is workforce reform. We know that health visitors and midwives are under pressure. Their job spec has expanded significantly, but we also know there's some really good practice of multidisciplinary workforces who are actually able to use different roles to better support families who are perhaps a bit reluctant to have someone in uniform or someone who's a bit older or doesn't look like them. They want somebody who has been through parenting and who perhaps looks like someone in their community. So actually workforce reform is vital. And then finally, leadership, national and local. We need to see accountable leadership so that we can continuously improve and not sort of treat it like a postcode lottery where with baby number 1, you get help, and with baby number 2, everything's shut down. So that was what the report proposed. And what we've been doing in the 2 and a bit years since is rolling it out. So in October 21, we got one of the biggest single new spending review commitments from Rishi as Chancellor. So we got 300 million for the Family Hub and Best Start for Life programme, and a further 200 million for supporting families, so for those with the greatest difficulties. So £500 million. And since then, what we've been doing is looking at those local authority areas in the greatest need and devising rollout programmes, implementation plans with them so that they can create the family hubs needed to provide universal support in their area, and then looking at all their plans around the services themselves. So we have some funded services, so parent-infant relationship work, breastfeeding and infant feeding support work, parenting programs themselves, and all of those services rolling out through that family hub model. So that's what we've been doing for the last 2 and a bit years. And just for example, this week I was in Cornwall and Devon, meeting with local authority areas to talk through with them how they're doing in rolling out their plans and sort of answering their questions and helping to facilitate things if they're struggling a bit. Because at the core of it, it requires join up of not just the health sector and the public health sector and the local authority sector, but also the voluntary sector, the third sector, and even volunteer groups like Home Starts, faith groups, and so on, if we're really going to give every baby the best start for life.
So that sounds incredibly interesting and important. And will these sit within integrated care systems? How will they fit within the ICS structures going forward, or are they separate?
No, they're not separate. They are fully integrated within the ICS systems. And the one critical factor, the reason I talk about the leadership being so important is because part of the vision is that every local area must decide, is it the chair of the ICS or is it the director of children's services who will be the single accountable lead for the best start for life? You choose, and different local authority areas are choosing different things. But what's essential to that, if you're going to have midwifery appointments, health visitor clinics, and parent-infant relationship work, and breastfeeding support volunteers, and parenting programs done by volunteers or Home Start or health visitors, if they're all going to be located in a family hub, that requires that the ICS and the local county council are working together, because in almost all cases, it's the local authority that owns, if you like, the family hub, the physical space, but it will be the ICS that provides a lot of the services within that family hub, and certainly a lot of the virtual support as well.
Great. And is there a map where we can see where these hubs are? I'm just thinking within the Royal College, we have a Child Health Ambassador scheme, where we have ambassadors at every single ICS nationally. I'm just thinking it would be a fantastic opportunity for those ambassadors to find out where, if they've got a family hub in their locality.
Absolutely. Yes, we can certainly. I'm just thinking, where is it published? We have a Start for Life website, and on my own website, AndreaLeadsom.com, there's a lot of material published. But Camilla, I will send you a map of exactly where the hubs are. Now, as I say, at the moment, they're beginning, really, they've written their development plans and they're all starting to roll these out. There are 75 upper tier local authority areas out of the 153 in England who have received additional funding for this. All 153 are told this is government policy, but 75 have received additional funding. Now, of those 75, 14 of them are what we're calling trailblazers. So Cornwall, Torbay, Northumberland, there are various different trailblazers dotted around the country, and they are the ones who are supposed to move further and faster. So if you have child ambassadors in those areas, it would be a very reasonable question to say, so show me a family hub. What are you doing? How are you implementing the best start for life?
Well, that sounds like a brilliant opportunity. I'll definitely take you up on that offer to get some details about where they are. We'll link them up with our ambassadors.
Great.
Can I ask you, in your introduction to your report, you've got this brilliant sentence that just jumped out at me. You say, prevention isn't only kinder, but it's also much cheaper than cure. And that absolutely chimes with the messaging that we are developing from RCPCH, which is all around disease prevention, health promotion, investing in a healthy childhood actually is an investment across the life course for the whole nation. But it's really difficult at the moment because there's so many competing priorities for completely understandable reasons. There's a big focus on the elderly and frailty, understandably a huge focus on cancer. So how do we make the case for a healthy childhood? And what lessons have you learned that you can share with us?
So that really is the billion-dollar question. And my life lesson as a politician is focus, focus, focus. So people say to me, so we really want to use some of your funding for 5-year-old runaways. And I'm like, I totally understand that, but you can't do that because this is about pregnancy to age 2. Part of the reason why I'm so passionate and focused on that period is because that's the period where a child can't advocate for themselves. As we know, human babies are unique in the extent of their underdevelopment at birth. Virtually every other animal can fend for itself from hours, if not a few days old. Human babies can't do anything for themselves at all, and their physical underdevelopment is just a part of it. It's the brain development that actually largely, when you're born, you just have your flight or fight instinct. A baby can only cry or sleep. That's it. So it can't sort of say, Mom, I'm hungry. So the baby requires a loving adult carer to sort out his or her needs, to soothe the cortisol levels. And to your point about it being not only kinder, but also cheaper. So the actual emotional well-being, the earliest experience of of the baby, both in the womb and outside the womb, and during that critical period of the development of the prefrontal cortex, the social and empathetic part of the brain, which peak period is 6 months to 18 months old. All of those things, those develop the building blocks for emotional, lifelong well-being. And if you are in the terminology securely attached to a loving adult carer, then you're literally learning that the world's an okay place. I can cope. So when life's ups and downs are thrown at you, you know, your best friend doesn't like you anymore, or your boyfriend leaves you, or you didn't get the grades you wanted, you will be able to cope. You've learned self-regulation, so you don't go off a cliff. So that's one big piece of prevention. If you can self-regulate, you can actually deal with the anger, the frustration, the jealousy. You don't either go out and hit someone, stab someone, or indeed turn in on yourself and end up thoroughly depressed and unable to work. And you can see all of the costs to society of all of those, albeit, you know, very, very sort of extreme outcomes that I've just mentioned there. But if you have a good start, you will cope with life's ups and downs. Not only that, but if you are breastfed, you are something like 10 times less likely to suffer from obesity, diabetes, and heart disease in later life. Your mum is less likely to suffer from ovarian cancer and breast cancers. You can put a cost on that. If you're breastfed, you're less likely to have your milk teeth removed because you've been fed Ribena through a baby's bottle. You know, babies with constipation is a hugely expensive. You know, if you don't want to look at the kindness, you just want to look at the cheapness. All of those things that are the result of actually quite often lack of information and education for parents who just, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to give my baby a Ribena in a bottle. You know, I have a fabulous story from a very senior health visitor who said to me, she went to see a young care leaver who was doing so well as a new mum, and who was telling her how she was feeding her 3-month-old Cocoa Pops because she loves her so much and she wants her to have the best. You know, it's just that's the kind of thing. So it's information, education, and those things result in much better physical outcomes, but I would argue much better social and emotional outcomes. And we're seeing now generations of young people with mental health issues who are not confident in their relationships. You know, Frank Field, the Labour MP for Birkenhead, did a big study of Birkenhead school pupils at the top of primary, asking them what do they want out of life. And they didn't want to be celebrities or footballers. They wanted to be, 1, good parents, and 2, to know how to make friends.
So that says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, your message is very clear, and it's a message that, you know, every child health professional listening to this podcast would completely endorse. I guess it's just how we win over the hearts and minds of, you know, key decision makers, to say that sometimes the short-term intention of, for instance, some of the cancer targets, as important as that is, we do need to focus on those kind of early years where often the rewards or the gains are far further into the future, but are no less important and arguably more important. And that's a difficult argument.
Yes, I mean, it is, except that is what governments do. You know, they multitask. So they can't, I mean, I often get a constituent writing to me, if I've just said something about, you know, the Palace of Westminster is crumbling, we've got to decant and fix it. And someone will write to me and say, I'd much rather you sorted out the problems with potholes in Northamptonshire. And I'm just like, yes, but life isn't like that, is it? You know, you don't either choose to get up in the morning or go on holiday or make breakfast. You know, you do all of those things. And government does all of those things. And so for me, again, the reason I bang on about babies is because, 1, they can't advocate for themselves. And 2, there isn't that cancer. Everybody agrees. Yes, cancer is absolutely vital. It's horrendous. If you're affected by it or someone you love that's all you want to think about. But the focus on babies just hasn't been there. And people sort of say, yes, well, we had Sure Starts. But actually, Sure Starts, I was a big fan of Sure Starts, no question about it. In my view, the Family Hub is like the 21st century equivalent, because Sure Starts were largely about buildings and they were about a nice place for families to go. Family hubs are going to be about ruthless focus on the outcomes for babies. We want generations of babies who are school ready, who are happy and secure in themselves, whose parents have stayed together. So, for example, one little stat, we know that up to 30% of domestic violence begins during pregnancy. Why? Because the partner's thinking, well, you're going to love this baby more than me, and, I'm not happy about that and I feel alienated. But on the other hand, we also know that a dad who is well attuned and in love with his baby, his testosterone levels drop. So just on a spectrum of male aggression, the extent to which dad is included and feels, I love my baby, what you're doing is you're actually creating the environment for a much more stable background for that baby. And so, we see so much couple breakdown in the first year of life, and anything we can do to stop that, to enable couples to deal with this huge challenge together and to help them to get through it in a way that supports their baby. And there's no doubt that, a baby witnessing domestic violence or family breakdown and so on, those are the adverse childhood experiences that we know go on to have profoundly bad outcomes for children later in life.
Absolutely. So as a Royal College, we've been doing a lot of work focusing on health inequalities and the impact of poverty on child health outcomes, and essentially creating a toolkit that allows paediatricians to feel much more confident to ask questions about home circumstances and the impacts of poverty. What challenges do you think the rising problem of poverty poses in terms of this really important government work on focusing on early years, and do you think there's a risk that it could become a sort of negatively impact on some of your really ambitious targets that you've set this programme?
So that's a very huge issue. And actually, one of the challenges that as I go around the country meeting particularly the parents and carers with the babies, I've seen so many babies in recent months. It's been absolutely brilliant. But chatting to the parents, number one, parents want support to be unstigmatizing. And unfortunately, for various reasons, a lot of Sure Starts became very stigmatizing for parents. If you were invited to the Sure Start, that was, oh, I'm a bad parent. So actually, somewhere that's inclusive, where, if you want a pint of milk, go to Tesco. If you've got a baby, go to the family hub. Everybody goes there. It's perfectly normal. It's like going to the library, there's no stigma associated with it. So that's really important. So in that sense, these services must be universal. Again, to assume that it's only poverty that creates, parents with challenges would be absolutely wrong. Yeah. However, you do make a very good point, which is that poverty, and particular bad housing, and poor education, those are the things that have a hugely high correlation with difficult parenting and challenging outcomes for babies and young children. So actually, part of the answer is making things universal. I met some lovely mums in a family hub in London who was saying, one was migrant mum with a baby. The other one was what you'd call a sort of white middle class mum from a very nice part of town. And the two of them had become great friends. And they were saying to me it had been brilliant for them because they would never have come into contact with each other. But through the family hub, the drop-in, they were now great friends, learning about each other's communities and so on. So I think that sort of being there for each other, supporting each other, they say it takes a village to raise a child, but actually the community of someone else who's going through, oh yes, I had bleeding nipples too, or, my baby, oh, he won't sleep, he wakes up at 3:00 every morning. Yes, so does mine. That kind of empathy, that sort of, we're all in it together, is very, very levelling. But nevertheless, I do take very seriously the point you make about poverty. I think one of the areas, interestingly, that people don't focus on enough is that of breastfeeding. Now, we have some of the worst breastfeeding rates in Europe, and yet breastfeeding is free, isn't it? And baby formula isn't. And breastfeeding has superb health outcomes for mums. So one of the funded strands of the work is on breastfeeding. And the interesting thing is so many mums and their partners want their baby to be breastfed. And 8 out of 10 parents that we've asked gave up breastfeeding sooner than they wanted to because they didn't feel supported. Now, whether that's through work, because if you go down the pub, everyone's like, what on earth are you doing if you decide to breastfeed in the pub? Likewise, it's sort of peers, it's sort of saying, what are you doing? That's disgusting. So, and also just the technical ability to breastfeed is so difficult, and without support, it's like riding a bicycle. You don't put your 6-year-old on a bike and say, right, off you go then. You help them, you support them, and yet we don't even do that. So I'm a big fan of breastfeeding.
Yeah, and so are we. So that chimes brilliantly. So Andrea, I've got a final question for you, which is really, it's incredibly motivating listening to you talk, because you clearly, know your topic, but it's underpinned by a real kind of passion to make an impact. And I think this is true of paediatricians, not just in the UK, but actually we've got a significant international membership as well. Most of us are motivated by a desire to make an impact, to somehow change the world. And so I would love you to finish off this podcast by just telling us, have you got any tips about, where did you find all this from within yourself? What motivates you? This clearly been a long, complicated project. I'm listening to you talking, it's not been without its challenges. What keeps you motivated, and how do you keep banging on about babies? Because that's, what we all need to do as well.
Yes, well, I totally admire the work of paediatricians. I think, you do such an essential job. And so I suppose one thing is that I've learned is to be flexible. So a good example of that is with a digital version of the Red Book. That's had to change a lot. And finally, we've got a way forward. So I'd love to see all paediatricians embracing electronic patient records that result in an electronic version of a Red Book, and trying to make it happen. And by that, what it requires is that there are different write access. And so the thing that frustrates me, the thing I've learned is to be flexible myself. So if I can't get something this way, then I'll try that way. And if someone is saying to me, no, we can't do that because, then I'll say, well, how about, could we do it this way instead? And I think, for me, the most frustrating thing I come up against is, no, but we do it this way. This is what we do. And I found that with a number, I don't want to name a particular type of early years workforce role, but in some roles, people say, no, we wouldn't like to do it that way because we like the way we do it. It's convenient to us. And so I'm just like, no, what you have to do is to put the baby at the center of it. It's not what's convenient for you. It's not what's so that you can be chatting to your colleagues in a safe space over there. It's what works for the baby. So for me, I just always put the baby at the center of it. And because the baby can't advocate for themselves, I then think, okay, so the baby can only articulate its needs through its parents. So what do the parents need? And so everything I do, whether it's where you're located, who you're collaborating with. And I also try to, talk human rather than complicated. And I know paediatricians do that. So parents understand exactly, they can get to grips with where the challenges are and not be scared and have things explained to them. But also I do think reaching out across not just the health sector, I do think health professionals tend to focus on, right, what's the health sector solution to this? Rather than, could Home Start help? Could a peer supporter help? Could a granny who's breastfed and who has been through all this, could she help? And in order to do that, you need to have the contact. So none of us can afford to sit in an ivory tower or an office or our own health space and not think about the broader early years support that's out there. So I guess that's just a few things. Be flexible, be focused on the outcome, which is putting the baby at the center of it all, and then thinking more broadly around the subject, not what can I do and what can the other specialist do, but actually, is there something more broadly that could help this family?
Fantastic. I think that's a really motivating point to finish our conversation. Andrea, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I'm delighted that you're banging on about babies, because we want to bang on about babies, children and young people. And it's fantastic to find such a passionate ally. We wish you the very best with the rollout of the family hubs, and we would be very, very keen to support you in any way in which we can, because our mission is the same as yours, and it's crucially around keeping the child at the centre of everything we do. So thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks very much, Camilla. It's been a pleasure.
So for those listening, you can find out more about the work of the college and how we champion child health, including how we work with parliamentary colleagues. You can find out about opportunities to get involved, as well as listen to the rest of our podcast series by visiting our website, which is www.rcpch.ac.uk. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.